Hello guys and welcome back on the channel. It's been a while and I want to teach you how to play against a system that became extremely popular lately and the last 15 years, mainly thanks to Nakamura. That's the double fianchetto, or it's Hippo. Lately I saw a Chessable guys, Eric Hansen. He did a series of lectures on how to play against Hippo, so it's pretty good to teach you how to play against those systems. Let's immediately get straight to the point. Once again, I'd like to remind you, it would be a very good thing if you could spread out a good word about the channel, tell your friends, and of course, support the channel at least by watching all these videos. Thanks so much. So let's immediately get started. We have two ways of getting those positions. After you play e4, Black can first begin with b6, which is originally Owen's defense, or they can go with g6, which is a modern defense. But let's first take a look at the systems when they play e4 and they go with g6. It's a little bit different version when they first play g6 and when they play b6. Why so? Because when they go first with g6 and they go for the modern defense, of course you play d4, bishop g7, and of course we always first develop the knight on c3. So when we do it, they just go with the thing like b6. They just go with the double fianchetto. And after they go for b6, we play f4. We always go for those 3 pawns. It's of extreme importance to always beat the Hippo with f4. You probably don't get a point of playing f4 right now, but everything is going to be absolutely clarified in just like a couple of moments. So when you play f4, they go bishop b7. You go knight f3. The main difference between the g6 modern defense and b6 Owen defense and the Hippo system is that here we're going to be playing this system with the knight on c3. In another move order with the b6, d4, bishop b7, bishop d3, g6, f4, bishop g7, knight f3, we won't have that knight on c3, and sometimes you're going to be able to push your pawn to c3 and to shut off the bishop on g7. That's the main difference between those two lines. But a little bit later about the Owen's defense order. So after g6, d4, bishop g7, knight c3, b6, f4, bishop b7, knight f3. What I like about this one is that you always go for these pawns being stretched from d4 to f4, and you go for those two knights on c3 and f3. But in general, you always play like this. And here, it depends what is Black gonna do. If Black goes for d6, like he wants to play knight d7, and doesn't want to go with any e6, you play bishop c4. It's of extreme importance, once again, to make sure that your opponent has to play e6 to shut off the activity of the light square bishop. Why so? Because imagine if your opponent goes like this, you instantly go for the bishop f7, this one, knight g5, king cannot go on f8 because of this fork. When they go with king here, you just go with the knight a6. And even if you can't do anything, you still should be very satisfied with a game like this, because game is very nice. Also, in some of these positions, you don't even have to play like this. You can even go with the knight g5, for example, and wait for them to do e6, in which case, once again, you can consider taking like this, or going with castle and breaking with knight f7, f5, just trying to reactivate the bishop on c4. All things considered, when they play d6, bishop c4, everyone will play e6. As soon as they do that, for the first time in this lecture, I gotta point out an importance of the following move, which is considered to be the refutation of the Hippo defense. What's that? That is f5 break. You go with the f5 break, and that's a golden rule. Hippo defense should be broken with f5. So, for example, let me just show you one game correspondence chess, 2300 guy, which is for correspondence chess pretty good. After e takes f5, e takes f5, you just open up the light square bishop. They go d5. You give check, c6, bishop d3. Now, both of these pieces are kind of stranded on the queen side. And now, when they go knight e7, trying to put some pressure against the pawn on f5, boom, bishop g5, going after the bishop, going after the knight, and the queen, threatening f6. They can't touch this pawn on f5, so they gotta go f6, bishop h4. Simply, they're not supposed to take anything and to touch anything on f5. Simply, they're going to have lots of problems with that pawn on f5 for the rest of the game. If they ever take, of course, you're going to take it. G takes f5, and then you just go for short castle. They have terrible pawn structure, terrible two Hippo bishops, and this just has to be an amazing type of game for black. In this game was bishop a6, castle short, queen to d3, and the guy captured on f5 gladly that pawn, and looks like he won the pawn. He's about to get a good game. Look what happened in the game. Rook a to e1, king f8, and boom, bishop takes f6. You just sack your piece for what? For weakening the king and allowing yourself to afterwards break with g4. So after they go bishop f6, g4, now all these pieces are under the fire of white pieces. So after knight g7, knight e5, queen d6, g5, took on f6. And by the way, the guy had to play knight f5 because after this, boom, rook f6, queen f6, and knight d7 would just win the game. So after knight f5, he went for queen h3, captured on f5, couldn't capture on f5, and of course after rook f7, another beautiful move, rook e7, and finished off this guy like this. A beautiful game that shows you like absolutely what are you supposed to do if they play early d6 without e6. Those who first go with e6, you just go with bishop d3. Makes no sense to place your bishop now on c4 because it would be a bad piece. Bad piece because it just, you know, like heads the pawn on e6 that is well defended by those two pawns on d7 and f7. And certainly when you play bishop c4, it doesn't seem to be that good for white any longer. So here white just goes for bishop d3 and knight e7. Do I have to remind you, if they go with d6, what do you have to do? Always here, since the bishop is not on c4, and they want to go with knight d7 or knight e7, you first make castle, and whatever they do, for example knight e7, there is no way you should hesitate here. So what do you have to do here? You just go and break with f5. That's the golden rule. That's all you have to remember about these positions, and that's it. I'm gonna show you one game of mine. So after g takes f5, e takes f5. For example, in a 3-minute game online back to 2021, my opponent went for knight f5. I captured that knight because I'm always happy to create double pawns, and not just that, to open f-file, to weaken king on e8. So my opponent went for, actually I went for bishop g5, bishop f6, I played queen e2, king f8, check, and here I went for a very lovely tactics. I gotta recognize that I'm not even down, you know, like maybe I was down a pawn, but his king was weak. He absolutely had all his pieces not being developed in the back rank, and somehow the only good piece was that bishop on b7. I said, let's go. I played knight g5, sacrificing bishop on h6, and when my opponent went for bishop h6, I mean, I don't see anything else in that position, I just played knight f7, and he resigned the game. It's a very simple thing. He can't take on f7 because rook f5, and the mate is inevitable or serious material consequences. Another game was knight d7 that happened in an online correspondence game. So f takes, knight g5, threatening the pawn on e6. And once again, it's not only threatening that, your bishop is open, your knight is open, you won't play knight f7, you want to mate him with the queen h5, your rook is open. What do you want? What more do you want from one position? Bishop d4, king h1, knight g6, queen h5, and he's simply fallen apart. g6, h7, e6. There is actually everything is just terrible in the black's game. This was the game, and soon after, black resigned. Just like you see, after we play bishop d3, they have to try to kind of fortify that f5 square and play knight e7. Of course, there is no hesitation. You shouldn't wait at all. You just have to go for what I'm teaching you. Break with f5. So after they go with knight e7, you just go castles. They just have to do castle as well. And when they do castle, boom, f5. Once again, for the third time tonight, I'm telling you, Hippo defense should be broken with f5. That's a crucial and one of the essential things that you have to get as a takeaway from tonight's lecture. So after e takes f5, e takes f5, what else? Knight b on c6. And here you can play bishop g5, for example, but I like the fact that this is one of the, let's just say, negative sides of having the knight on c3, but at the same time it's positive side. Negative because they're threatening the pawn on d4. Positive because now you can push your pawn to d5, and the same knight on c3 just over protects the pawn on d5. After knight b4, f takes, you just open f5, bishop g5, adding one more piece. Reminds me of Grand Prix attack. Knight b d5, you take, bishop d5, and queen e1. You threaten with tempo, you go on h6, and who's gonna stop you from mating this guy on the king side? Guys, you have to admit that this looks awesome. And I now want to show you like a different order of moves. Owen's defense. There is just a tiny, like a very slight difference, because when you play d4, bishop b7, bishop d3 to defend the pawn on e4, and when they go with g6, here you don't necessarily have to play knight c3 like in previous position. What does it mean? So we just go for f4, and once again we go for all these pawns being stretched from d4 to f4, building up a very powerful center. And when they go with the bishop g7, you just go with knight f3. So when they go with now with e6, we just break it with f5. So let's say your opponent goes for d6, you go castles, and let's say he goes e6. Who's gonna wait? Who's gonna wait? There is a correspondence game. Once again, f5, and you just break it. They take, you take. They go knight e7. By now, you could have learned that this type of position goes absolutely fantastic with the bishop g5, where you threaten f6, cannot force your opponent to either take on f5 by pawn, which is absolute disaster, or they should kick your bishop away. You just go back, and now they're left with probably one of the worst bishops in the history of this game. So they just go with the knight bc6, knight c3, queen d7, d5, and once again the knight on c3 supports the d5. Here went for the bishop f5, and soon after won the game. They go for knight d7. Now we go for Anatoly Karpov's game. Anatoly Karpov, whose style you gotta like, you gotta enjoy so much. And after knight d7, you just go for c3. After you play c3, you're just controlling and building up a very strong center. So you just go for that, and you just fight against the bishop on g7. That's what I told you when I mentioned previously what's the main difference between these positions and positions where the knight stands on c3. By playing c3, now bishop on g7 is just suffering. So after e6, what do you have to do here? You just go for queen e1, and you just want to play f5. On your question, hey Maya, you told us that when we make castle, have the rook on f1, bishop d3, we can just break with f5. Could we do it now? Of course. And that would be one of the best moves and one of the most logical follow-ups of this variation. But on your question also, can we play anything else but this? Of course you can. And in this position, you don't have to go with that. You can go with the queen e1 as well. It prepares f5, and let me just show you. Of course, it prevents knight e7 because of f5, and once again, for the 5th time tonight, I'm showing you that f5 is a killer. But in case of queen e7, his opponent wants to make a long castle. Karpov, who was always fond of these strategic ideas, he just went for a4. He just wants to push this pawn on a5 and to say, don't you dare to make long castle, buddy. I'm gonna kick your ass so bad. And this guy says, okay, let's go. I'll go long castle. Let me just take my chances. a5, you're just opening the a file, and now the king is gonna suffer. So take a look at Karpov, who was one of the best positional players of all times, how he comes up with the attack by gradually involving all his pieces onto the queen side. A takes, queen e2, wants to play bishop a6. Warning for all of you, don't you ever play bishop a6 if you have to eventually capture by rook, because when they take on a6 and you take by rook on a6, they're just going to play king b7, move the rook to a8, and you're gonna be in trouble. That's what you have to remember. So I don't want to show you like the rest of this game. If you play like rook a6, they're just going to have like king b7, and they're just going to have like a very nice defensive game. This is why Karpov went for queen e2. The guy played knight b8, preventing the idea of bishop a6. He went for knight a3, involving one of the last pieces, playing rook e1, threatening to take on f5 and weaken e6, playing knight b5, just involving another piece around the king, and playing e5. After d5, played beautiful b3 followed by c4, played c4, brought a knight back just in time, played bishop d2, played knight a4, threatening fork, and when the guy went for queen c7, played knight b6. Karpov won against Georgievsky back to 1976 because after bishop a5, queen b3, queen was out of moves. Beautiful game by Karpov as well. And finally, those who play the Ovens defense, and when you play f4, watch out, you always have to go with f4 because eventually you gotta break with f5. Imagine that your opponent goes with a6. You just play castles. So what's happening? They go d6, break it with f5. How many times do I have to repeat the same? They go with d5. On d5 you play e5, they go knight e7, and then you just go b4. b4 to avoid c5. b4 that shows like how bad both of these bishops being fianchettoed are. And when they play knight e7, go with a4 and go with a5, break on the a file, and just go for a game like this. Finally, after like e6, short castles, and knight e7, do I have to show you one of my games? Well, I guess this is gonna be good for the end of this game. The game was played online like 2 months ago. I just really enjoyed this one, and hopefully you're gonna like it a lot. My opponent went for knight e7. Well, question for you. Pause the video and ask yourself, what should you play? Well, guys, if by now you didn't learn that you shouldn't play f5, or actually that you should play f5, then you definitely have to quit this game and to go for something else. F5 is the move. F5 is the break. F5 is how you actually support with the bishop on d3 and the rook on f1. My opponent, after f5, had a possibility to take on f5. He had a possibility to play short castle and to take by g-pawn on f5. If they go for castles, you always take on g6 and play c3, solidifying pawn structure, shutting off bishop on g7, developing knight on a3, while the queen goes on g3 or h4, depending on circumstances over the board. If g takes f5, of course you should always take it and play that famous bishop g5 move that pretty much creates lots of problems in the black's camp. Knight e7, queen d8, king is weak, f7, pawn is terrible. And finally, my opponent went for e takes f5. 90% of players takes by e pawn. You take, and my opponent decided to take the knight on f5. Terrible move, let's be honest. And that's what we all want. You're probably wondering, all the time he's been showing us variations, but in none of these lines, black captured on f5. Well, it's time to see what to do. Knight g5 crossed my mind at first, but then I said, let me just play d5, trying to close the light square bishop and play knight e4, capturing eventually by knight on f5. The guy went with castles, I played knight e4. I was threatening knight f5, obviously it's really strong. Played the king h8, I played knight f5, and e5, win the dark square bishop, pack your stuff, go home. He played bishop e5, wants to even come up with some counter-attacking chances. I played a4. I really like this kind of crazy moves, but this a4 move is not there because I want to play a5. This move is there because I want to play rook a3 and involve one more piece into the attack. Believe it or not, this rook won the game. He went for d6, I played rook a3, knight d7, and I moved finally my rook to h3. My opponent didn't recognize my threats, of course, that I want to play queen h5. He has to go for knight f6. I pinned this knight with the bishop g5, and after rook g8, I captured an f6, moving the defender of the pawn on h7 and saying, see you next time, buddy. Well, see you next time, guys. Thanks for watching the video. Hopefully, you will never have problems against the Hippo defense in the future. Hope that you enjoyed the video. Hope you're gonna support the channel, and see you very soon. Bye bye.